What's going on, y'all? Welcome to ReThink Season 2. Y'all, you're getting ready to hear some incredible information from the one and only Angela Rye. Now, the voting cycle might have closed for this year, but everything you're about to hear, lock it in so you are informed, you're educated, and you know how to best serve your community and yourself the next voting cycle that's coming up. Y'all, this is going to be an incredible episode. I can't wait for you to join us for the rest of Season 2 of the ReThink podcast. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the ReThink podcast. I am Cameron Friend, one of your hosts for Season 2 of the ReThink podcast. We are so excited to have you here. We are so excited to get into the conversation that we're going to have today. It's going to be a great discussion. We're going to get real in depth on voting and why it matters, but also some things that you need to be aware of. Maybe opportunities for you to get plugged into some places as well. So it's going to be a great discussion. And as always, got my co-host Farris Watkins here as well. Look, y'all already know, every time Farris and I get together, it's a great conversation. What's going on, Farris?
Hey, I'm excited. We got one of the most amazing commentators, one of the most amazing women of our time right now with us. And we can't wait to get into this conversation with her. Thank you all so much for joining us once again.
Yeah, absolutely. And y'all know, we want to thank y'all on behalf of Dr. Bernice A. King, the CEO of the King Center, for participating in the ReThink podcast and wanting to build a beloved community right where you are. The vision of the King Center, we envision a beloved community where injustice ceases and love prevails. And the mission of the King Center is to empower people to create a just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world by applying Dr. King's nonviolent philosophy and methodology. And with that being said, Farris, we have the one, the only Angela Rye coming on today, y'all. This is going to be incredible. What's going on, Angela?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, Angela, you are doing a lot of different things. You are a special correspondent, political commentator, the CEO of Impact Strategies. You've been all over. And I've been listening to you personally for many years now. I've learned a lot from you as well. So I truly want to say thank you for even just coming on to the podcast. And I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to have.
Absolutely. And apologize for my appearance. I thought it was going to be audio only, but it is what it is. So this is me. This is me.
No, you look great.
Keeping it real. Maybe too real, but keeping it real.
Yes, that's what we came for. We came for you and authentically you. And we can't wait to get into this conversation. So let's go ahead and get to it.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, Angela, Dr. King and many other civil rights leaders have spent years advocating for voting rights and why it's so important for every individual to have access to that right, especially in Black and Brown communities. Now, for you personally, do you think that there's been significant progress in voting rights since the 1960s? And are many of those rights being threatened today? And if so, how should we as communities continue to combat some of those threats that are trying to take away those voting rights?
Yeah, I think what we saw after Barack Obama's election in 2008 and shortly after the passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010 is the standing up of something called the Tea Party. And with the standing up of the Tea Party, it seemed to be a very dedicated, intentional desire to peel back and roll back voting rights. We saw in the 2013 Supreme Court decision in Shelby versus Holder that they would, intend to virtually gut Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which was a pre-clearance provision, and ensure that states that had a tradition of white supremacy and racism, particularly as it related to our voting rights, that now there are no more protections for residents in those particular states. And I think what we've seen again since 2010 is an intentional effort for members, elected officials who are members of the American Legislative Exchange Council. They all use the same boilerplate bill for voter ID. Introduced that bill several times over and over again, worked to cut back on early voting days, worked to make it more difficult for people to vote absentee, and especially made things more difficult for our young people and for our elders. And those are the folks who tend to vote more progressively. So there's been a very intentional effort, not on suppressing all votes, but certainly on suppressing some. I remember one of the most egregious things I read around 2012, or maybe it could have been 2011, was that in Texas, where they were really encouraging people to get voter ID, there were some areas where the nearest licensing place was 250 miles. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. It is hard for me to even fathom that, right? We have one that's 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And so when you're in an urban area or a city, a major metropolitan area, you're not thinking that it could be that difficult. Well, it can be. And we've seen it be really, really difficult. Folks trying to get their mail-in ballots never comes in the mail. When they send in the ballot, you hear about post offices that have stacks and stacks of ballots that weren't counted. It happened in Florida when my friend Andrew Gillum ran for governor in 2018. Saying all that to say, since 1965, when Dr. King fought for voting rights, when, John Lewis, God rest his soul as well, was fighting for voting rights and walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with with Amelia Boynton and so many others, right? So many others whose shoulders we stand upon. What we know is that if they looked at the condition of voting rights today, it would not be sufficient. And so what we need to be asking on the federal, state, and local level, at every single level, and even in our homes, is this sufficient? And we know it's not. It's not equal. It's not accessible. It's not what Fannie Lou Hamer said she was sick and tired of. We have to make sure that it gets better, and it needs to get better soon. And that means that we have to dedicate some real resources and our time and our discipline to ensuring that our votes are counted and that we understand our political power does not stop at the ballot box.
Yeah, definitely. I heard you mention, I can't remember where I saw it, but you mentioned how our generation, or the generation that's coming now, will have less rights than we have right now. And when I thought about that, I was like, wow, like, to think about that, in the 1960s, our ancestors were fighting for these rights that we take for granted right now. And now to see those rights being threatened again, what are some tangible things that we as a generation can do so that we can ensure not only our right to vote, but our right to exist here in America?
Our right to exist. That's powerful. I think, one of the things that I've been referencing so much, and it's frankly one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the work around the Black Census Project, that's been led by Black Futures Lab, which was founded by Alicia Garza, is this year, 2022, marks 50 years since the 1972 National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana. That is the last time that Black people overall came together to decide upon, agree upon, and discuss a Black political agenda. Before emancipation, Black folks were gathering every single year to have those same conversations. And what we know is that emancipation was a word, indeed, maybe on paper, but not indeed. And we have to figure out additional ways for us to truly be liberated and free. And so when we consider where we are right now, the fact that 50 years later, I always pull this out. I'm going to do it here too. This is a bound version of the National Black Political Agenda. When we look at this document, there are still so many areas where we are not free, where we have not made strides forward, or we took some steps forward only to take steps back. And so what we have to really understand as a people is what it's going to take those steps forward and solidify them, cement them, to ensure that there is no steps backwards. That is what other politically empowered communities and cultures do. And what we know is that for them, voting is not optional. For us, it should not be either. But voting is not the end. Voting is just the beginning. I always say that's just where you cross the threshold of democracy into what real political power looks like. So that's the thing. We have to really figure out how we ensure that we solidify our rights. We get to a place, like I remember in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected, it was like, okay, finally, now we're going to deal with racism. Now we're going to get reparations. Now we had all of these big things that in grand hopes, only to realize that racism met him in the hallways of the Senate, the United States House, in state legislatures all over the country, and city governments, and school boards. Now, right, kids are even being told that they can't learn their own history in classrooms because it's critical race theory. And by the way, as someone who took 2 critical race theory classes, that's not a bad thing, right? So we really have to treat everything like it's a state of emergency, because it is. When a woman can't decide what to do with her body, when a person has to fight so hard just to get access to the ballot box, when we're talking about whether or not students who look like us will be able to matriculate in college because affirmative action policy is being considered in the Supreme Court, and they're saying some crazy things in some of the questions they're asking. Shout out to Katanji, who's representing for the culture. But all of these things are in question, not to mention police violence in our communities, not to mention our kids now having to learn gun safety protocol in classrooms, at school, at elementary schools at that. There's a lot on the line, and we have to be able to walk, chew gum, shoot a basketball, carry a book, and drive at the same time. Don't text and drive, though. But all of that, right? Like, we really have to figure out how to do it all. And for that, we got to call on the ancestors to figure out how they balanced it all. Because here we are, still fighting another day.
Right.
Well, and I think that also ties into a lot, Angela. You know, we just finished another election cycle, and there's been a lot that's been happening nationally. Obviously, this year, the Uvalde shooting, you had Buffalo, you've had different incidents of police brutality. You've had a lot of different things. Obviously, the CRT education has been on the docket, and how we even understand what that looks like. So for people, especially for millennials and Gen Z, that are trying to mobilize, and also, Angela, that want to adopt the nonviolent way of life that Dr. King talks about, that addressing the injustice, the evil, and not particular people. How can people, especially young people, hold their elected officials accountable? Like, what are ways that they can actually go at targeting these people and the issue, and maybe seek to have change in their community?
Yeah, I think the first thing is know who your elected officials are. So many times you can ask someone like, who's your state rep? You know, who's your city council member? Who's your member of Congress? Who are the 2 senators in your state responsible for representing your interests in the United States Senate? And often what you find is people do not know. So the first thing we know is knowledge is power. You've got to know who these people are, and then you got to know where you can reach them. Can you reach them via email? What are their email addresses? Can you reach them via phone? What are their phone numbers? Have you gone to a city council meeting? Have you let your voice be heard? What are the most important issues to you, or to your family, or to your community, or to the culture? What are the things that you want to ensure that when they go to cast a vote, that they're doing it with your interests in mind? Some of the most important conversations I've had around this are ensuring that folks know these people work for you, whether you elected them or not, because your taxpayer dollars pay them. So you make them work for you, even if they sit on the side of the aisle that you don't like. Always make sure that you are in communication with people who have the responsibility of serving your community. So, and when you begin to develop that relationship, you'll find that relationship becomes mutually beneficial. They're learning about things from you that they don't have the opportunity to engage around because they're so busy. The people on their teams, their staff are so busy. I worked on Capitol Hill. I happen to know this a little bit. The meetings were only 20 minutes on Capitol Hill because that's all we had time for. So if you're one of those people that's constantly a resource to your elected official, they're more likely to serve your interests. There are a lot of folks who say, well, I can't write a campaign contribution check. They're not going to listen to me. Not so, especially if you come with a whole coalition. If you come with numbers, those numbers are just as effective as a campaign check.
Wow. So you mentioned just how we as individuals think about our elected officials. And I feel like the notion is often that, like, oh, if I didn't vote for that person and they might be a different party then just because I'm not in their party, they're not going to advocate on my behalf. But the truth is that they, like you said, they're working for us whether we voted for them or not. And I have heard so many elected officials say on both sides of the aisle, all sides of the aisle, let us know, how can we help you, right? I really appreciate that when we're progressing in our lives and we're progressing in America, that people can really look at our elected officials and say, hey, I want this, that, and the third to be done. But the reality of it is that people don't think that their voice will be heard. So when you take a step back and look at how people are voting now, they really don't want to vote because they feel like regardless of if I vote or not, nothing is going to happen because these people are going to push their political agenda. And I feel like that is the reason why, especially here in Georgia, that people are voting more progressively, right? Voting so that they can see somebody that represents them or somebody that looks like them, because they feel like just the mere image of whatever it might be, just the mere image of that person might change it. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that we as a generation, or we as people, we as new voters, why do we not want to gravitate towards or push or keep accountable the elected officials that we have?
I think that some of it has to do with apathy, right? Like if you don't see people serving you over time, you get discouraged.
Right.
And when you don't see it consistently modeled for you, even though we have activists historically in our community, it's not like a critical mass. You know, we saw a critical mass show up around the death of George Floyd because we had already been frustrated about Breonna Taylor, because we had already been frustrated about Ahmaud Arbery, and because George Floyd died in such an egregious manner. And we were already frustrated about all the folks who never were named, but we happened to know who they were, right? So there was a critical mass, and then the critical mass was joined by people from other cultures, right? From other racial backgrounds. So people got engaged in that way. What you have to hope for is that it's not going to take a critical mass for you to show up. And again, I go back to Black census. This, I'm going to be honest with y'all, is one of the most frustrating experiences I've ever had trying to organize Black people around something that I know is in our best interest. We're not talking about the United States Census. I still believe Black folks should participate in the United States Census. But when Black folks take the time to develop a survey around what the most important issues are for you, so they can use that data to develop an agenda to take to elected officials on every level, for when you feel like you're too tired and you can't lift up your own hands, what do you have to lose in that? 5 minutes out the day. You spend longer than that on TikTok, looking at shade room posts, you know, looking on Instagram at sometimes nonsense. I will be honest. I sometimes get a good inspirational quote or two from Instagram. Right. But like, if you can take 5 minutes to secure the next generation's best interest in your own, what do you have to lose?
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's for when you feel like I'm not enough, why not join this almost 60,000, you know, Black folks who've taken this survey? Why not get it closer to 100,000? Why not get us to 150, 200? Who cares who's running it if the data is going to help you in the long run? And I think sometimes, you know, we love to talk about the crabs in a bucket mentality. Sometimes I don't even think it's that. I think that we are so afraid of our own potential power that we won't even try to walk in it. We would rather sabotage our progress than to see what happens if we try.
Right.
Angela, with that in particular, honestly, what I hear, Angela, it's like there's been a significant amount, especially from the Black community, of mistrust when it comes to the government, and especially with the federal government. Now, obviously, there's a lot of legitimacy behind that, and we know the historical components. So for you, when you see the apathy, as you described, or maybe even the hesitation with being a part of the census, do you think it comes from that place of mistrust that we don't know that even with this source, even if it's Black-led, we don't know if this actually will work in our favor?
Yeah, sure. But also, if it's the mistrust of the feds, this is to hold the feds accountable. Right? If it's mistrust of the government, this is to hold the government accountable with data. So of course I understand mistrust in the federal government. Of course I know, like my dad to this day, if I say something crazy on the phone, he's like, watch out, they're tapping the phone. Of course I understand, right? I understand why there was hesitation around COVID vaccines. It doesn't mean that that's in our best interest. And at some point we have to just say, is what I've been doing, has it worked? Has it worked? And if it hasn't, or if you know it needs to work better, just try another approach. Just try another way.
Right.
You know, there are people who I don't even like, that I don't even get along with, that I reached out to about the Black census, because it's not about me or my ego or my ability to forgive like God or not, right? It's about, this is what is going to move the culture forward, and you represent a segment of this population that I'm never going to reach.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's because they think there are some people that say I'm bought off by Democrats. I wish they would give me a check. They haven't given me a check. There's some people that say, you know, well, you light skin, I don't know if you mixed, I'm not gonna do that. Like, right? Like, there are all these random things that people come up with. Are you from the West Coast, so you don't really know my struggles in the South, or whatever? There's all kinds of constructs that we develop to make it so that someone can't speak for us or engage us or lead us down a particular path. And I just think in the long run, it doesn't serve our collective best interest.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, that's so interesting. Go ahead, Farris.
That really made me think about just the common quote, like, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, you know?
Yeah.
And this, if you look at it as basketball, this is a shot, right? And you can't make a point unless you actually try to shoot it, right? But then it also led me to think about Kingian nonviolence and the steps, the principles and the steps. But the first step of Kingian nonviolence is information gathering. How in the world is anybody supposed to do anything if we don't do something as simple as letting people know what our issues are? If we don't give them the information that's requested in the Black census, right? How is anybody supposed to know? And then what we learned through nonviolent training is that 90% of issues are halted and solved through information gathering, right? Once you have gotten your information, and then you take a step back to see, okay, I have become an expert in this area, right? I know exactly what is needed on both sides. And now we can start to move everything forward. So that's so good. Thank you so much, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand that there is actual strategy, actual proven strategy that has worked to get us to where we were. Now we have to work to get it back, work to keep it. And those are the tangible things that will help us.
I love that. Yeah.
And I think this is actually a really good segue, Angela, because, you know, as we're even talking about like having a beloved community mindset, like that kind of thing, meaning I'm thinking about the collective. You know, we use phrases at the King Center like love-centered, other-centered, equity. Like, we want to build into a community, and we understand us as the World House. We are all interdependent and connected because we have to rely on each other to get there. So for us and for people that are trying to help the world become a better place, help the United States to be livable for everyone, including and especially Black and brown folks, how can we have a better beloved community mindset with all of the issues that we are facing every single day? How can we encourage millennials and Gen Z to get plugged into establishing that mindset where they are today?
I love this question so much because even though I'm not a staff person of the King Center, I feel like family with y'all. And part of it is my dad, who's now 80, has dedicated so much of his adult life to MLK principles, and to serving the advancement of his legacy, from getting the street name changed in Seattle, Washington, from Empire Way to Martin Luther King Boulevard, to now I wish I would have had that pin on too, but he has the King County was changed to Martin Luther King County in the early 2000s. My dad slings those pins like evangelists sling tracks. Like he's like, you need a Martin Luther King County pin. And he's so dedicated to it every year, even now, super active. When I was just at home, he was on the phone, like, I'm on my Martin Luther King planning committee for the march, you know, in January. Like, he is so engaged. And I think it's been so influential to me that I have a group of Black and brown orgs that I put together with my friend Mike De La Rocha in LA, and we're called the Beloved Community. And so it means everything to me. I think that we all advance when we begin to care, right? To hear each other, to reaffirm how much we matter, how great we are. When we affirm our power, not through the lens of abuse, but by what Dr. King said is the ability to achieve purpose. That is real power. And so when we begin to affirm that, not just for millennials and zennials and for all the folks who are younger than me, but also for our elders and my peers, that is when we will truly advance. We have been taught intentionally that we don't matter. And that is why a saying and a phrase and an affirmation and a mantra like Black Lives Matter is so significant to us. We have to demonstrate how much we matter in all of these varying ways. I'm going to prove that you matter by ensuring that you're paid your worth. Right. I'm going to ensure that you matter by making sure that we change policy so that Black kids can get into schools, so that Black contractors receive government contracts at the municipal, state, and federal level. I'm going to make sure you matter by ensuring Black asset managers have the ability to manage pensions for labor unions and governments all around. I'm going to ensure you matter by making sure that you're represented in appointed positions, in whether it's Senate appointed, cabinet officials, whatever, on every level. I'm going to make sure that you know you matter and that you are represented. That is how I show you matter. When I can see myself reflected in you, as you said earlier, Farris, is when I can see myself somewhere, I know that I matter. And I think those are the kinds of things that we can reaffirm, even when we're not talking about our politics, but they matter in how we fight, on how we ensure our activism, on how we're filling out the Black census, right? Right. Across the board, these are the issues of concern to us. This is how we make sure that we matter. This is how we ensure that we go from mattering to counting. Yeah. Right. And we do that when we stand in unity. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And that drives home also like quality over quantity, you know. We always want to drive home that even if we give all of the numbers, we want to make sure that the quality of the people that we're putting up for office, the quality of the people that we're backing up, are going to make sure that our names are heard, our voices heard. I wanted, and I know this is not a part of one of our questions, but I just really wanted to ask you, you have accomplished so much, and it makes little Black girls like me, it makes me look at what we can aspire to be, how we can educate ourselves, how we can go beyond what the status quo might be. What inspired you to really take this on and inspire others?
Yeah, I feel like I didn't have a choice. And thank you for that, Farris. My dad named me after Angela Davis. Again, raised in the house with an activist, a mom who's an educator, a very Black one, was on every affirmative action commission there was, and made sure that there were Black kings and queens on my wall. There were Black dolls. And I was like, there was no choice. There was never a choice and never a question. And so I thank God for that, because I know that's a point of privilege. What I would say now is, you know, even when I was talking to my good sister Alicia about Black census, just knowing that at some point we have to move beyond the idea that we deserve to be here to proving what we need to survive here. And that is what I think this very necessary bridge is, and that we cross into taking the Black census and into advocating for the Black Census Project. Yeah. So that's why, that's my why. And I will always sign up, like sign me up 10 times over, from starting the Black Student Union in high school, my best friend, to now. Like, if it's something that's going to advance us, I'm down.
I love that so much. So thank you once again. And that right there is the beloved community, you know, having that sense of obligation, that sense of this is necessary. That is the same driving force that started my Uncle Emil and this whole movement, you know, the people that toiled with him, the foot soldiers, right? Like the meetings that they would have in the basements of different buildings and things like that. In the middle of the night, they might have worked all day, but they felt like this has to happen. And so thank you for being a leader in our community and showing us that, this is an obligation. This is something necessary, and we won't stop till we get it.
Yeah, and also too, you know, Angela, thank you even just for promoting and helping to understand what the Black Census Project is and why it's so important, and why it's so important that each one of us gets involved. And everyone that's listening to this, I highly encourage you to fill out the Black Census. You can find it on the King Center social media site, and make sure you share that with people, because it's very important that we want to make sure that every single voice is heard and everyone is counted as we're talking about these things. So Angela, this has been an incredible conversation. So we are so sincerely thankful to you that you took the time out to do this. And, you know, we want to continue obviously to support your work. And we're so glad on behalf of the King Center that you've even taken the time to do this conversation, but also even, you know, what you said, and believing that you are in partnership and in collaboration with the King Center's mission of creating the beloved community. So truly, thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Please, everybody, go to blackcensus.org and take the survey today. We're moving through right till December 31st. So do it for me for Christmas. That's what I want for Christmas.
Y'all know what time it is. Hey, Rethink Season 2. Look, we are just getting started, and we will be back soon, Farris. I can't wait.
We love you.